I'm going to turn it over to Dr. David Crawford.
All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about pain. So I was in the office a few days ago, and a guy came in to see me as a 19, 20-year-old kid, and he had slammed his hand in the car door. And he had gone to the school nurse, and she had, put it in this like homemade sling thing. And he came in, and so I took his hand out, and I was kind of examining it, and he couldn't bend it. He was having like excruciating pain, and I would just barely touch his hand, and he had this pain, and he couldn't bend his hand at all. And so I said, "Oh my gosh, this could be bad." So, it wasn't really swollen. There wasn't a lot of bruising. I was like, man, it doesn't look that bad. So I sent him downstairs. I got an x-ray. He came back up. I looked at the x-ray. I showed it to him. I said, "Hey, look, here's your bones. There's no fracture. I don't see any sign of external thing. I don't think, it doesn't look like there's anything broken." And he goes, "Oh, okay." And so he looks at it. He kind of goes like this. He's like, "Take off the sling. I'm good to go." Right? So what happened? Today, before I came up here, my stomach hurt, right? I had a little neck pain, a little sore. Nothing wrong with me, right? There's nothing wrong, but my stomach hurts, right? And so as soon as I get up here, it kind of goes away, right? I start talking. What's going on? Pain is complicated, and the first thing that we have to understand is that pain and really all experience, whether it's vision or all of our sensation, is a construct of the world inside of our brain. Okay, and it is not an objective reality. And so I'm going to give a couple more examples. A guy I know had a patient who was working at a construction site, and he was he's working at a construction site. It was late at night. He was all by himself, and he took a nail gun and he accidentally put it right through his hand. Okay, and he didn't have any pain. No pain. Obvious structural damage, no pain. And he went to the hospital, and as soon as he got to the hospital, he started having pain. Okay? And the reason for that, who knows, but his brain turned off the pain because his brain decided it was more important for him to be able to get to the hospital than to be incapacitated at this construction site all by himself late at night. The flip side, there was a case in the British Medical Journal about 15 years ago of a guy who was working at a construction site, very similar case, actually, and he fell. It was like a story or so, and he landed on a nail in his foot, right through his boot, all the way through, sticking all the way through. Big nail. And he was in immediate, excruciating pain. And they rushed him to the hospital. Okay? They get him to the hospital. They cut off his boot. And the nail was right between his toes. It hadn't touched it. Okay? And he didn't have pain. So these are examples. No physical damage, no injury, right? But excruciating pain. Okay? And we have all experienced both of these examples to some degree, if you think through your life. Okay? We've all experienced times when there was no structural damage, and yet we felt pain, and we've all experienced times where we had pain, or we had whatever. You know what I'm talking about. All right. Right. So how does sensation work? So we talk about pain. What is it? Okay? It's really a construct in our brain. So the nerves in your body, the nerves in your fingers and your hands, say, they don't sense pain, okay? They sense physical and chemical changes, okay? So there are stretch receptors. There are temperature receptors, okay? There are chemical receptors. So when there's a cut and oxygen gets in and there's more acid buildup, or there's all sorts of different things that test physical properties, okay? And then the nerves send that signal up into your spinal cord and then up into your brain, okay? And the first place they go is they go to the processing center, right? And so all of these different sensations go into the processing center, which is in the lower areas of the brain, in the brain stem primarily, okay? And that processing center says, well, okay, have we seen this before? Do we know what it is? Do we not know what it is? Is this dangerous? Okay? And then that processing center has to decide what to do with it, right? And if it decides that this is dangerous, it sends out the alarm, right? And the alarm is pain, okay? And so it sends out through a nerve pathway this pain, okay? And it's a signal that goes up to the higher center, and then you experience pain, okay? So, and those pathways it's like with practice, okay? If you have more pain, if you use that pathway more, it gets stronger, it gets bigger, okay? So neurons, those are the little brain cells, get recruited in, and they make that pathway bigger and stronger, okay? So the more you experience a certain pain, the more you experience that alarm signal, the stronger that pathway gets and the more automatic it gets. Just like reading. We're talking about practicing reading, and you make those pathways stronger. It's the same thing with pain. If you practice pain, those pathways get stronger. Okay? So, where are we going from here? So, it's hard for me to kind of distill all of this down. But there are a lot of things that modify the way that we experience pain. Okay, so first we talk about meaning and attention. Okay, so what modifies the way that we experience pain is what it means to us. Okay, so there's a famous example of a guy who's walking through the bush hiking in Australia. Okay, he's done it thousands of times. He's walking through. Okay, he feels a prick on his leg, right? And it goes up, and the meaning that his brain attributes to it is that he's been hit by a burr, So he just keeps walking, and 10 seconds later, he falls down and almost dies because it was a snake, right? A deadly snake. So the next time, a year later, he's out walking in the bush, he feels that same prick on his leg, and he falls down because this time his brain said it's a snake, and that was the meaning, but it was a burr, and he was fine. Okay, and so the meaning that our brain attaches to it is very important. Okay, the kid that I saw with the hand, he thought it was broken, right? And so that sensation that he was having, the meaning was it's broken. As soon as I told him it wasn't broken, he didn't have the pain, okay, because the meaning wasn't there anymore. Similarly, attention will amplify pain, okay? So if you've ever been to a doctor and you say you had back pain, hopefully what your doctor didn't tell you is go home and keep a journal or a log of your pain, okay? Because that is the worst possible thing you can do. I mean, worst possible. One of the worst things you can do for pain, okay? Because every time you pay attention to it, every time you say, I wonder, is my back hurting right now? Guess what? Your back's going to hurt, right? Every time you stop and say, is my stomach, is my GERD acting up? It's going to act up, okay? Because your brain puts that meaning, or takes that attention as a signal that that's what you want, okay? That's what's supposed to be happening, okay? So meaning and attention, okay? So what we're talking through is, so there's the sensory component, all the nerves, we talked about that, the cognition and the meaning and attention we pay to it. And then the third factor that's very important in chronic pain is the affective. So we've got sensory, cognitive, and affective. And the affective component is emotions and the emotional response and the way that emotions affect pain. Okay? So just to kind of set it up, I was feeling very nervous before coming up here. Okay, still am kind of. And so when I get stressed, nervous, a lot of times I get like a stiff neck or a little bit of pain in my neck. And so that's what kind of happens. So, right now my neck's a little bit tight and painful. And that's kind of where I carry that stress and nervousness. And all of us, if I asked you, I think you could probably tell me, where do you carry stress in your body? Just think through that. Like, where do you carry stress? And you'd be able to tell me, okay? So in the brain stem, or in the lower parts of the brain, okay, what's called some people call the lizard brain. It's kind of the older parts of the brain. And there's a part of the brain called the amygdala, which is very closely connected to the autonomic nervous system. Okay, autonomic nervous system is the part of the nervous system that you don't have to think about. Okay, it controls things like your heart rate, your blood pressure, your intestines and how fast or slow they process food, your breathing, all of those things. Muscle tension, so stuff like cortisol release and adrenaline. Okay, it's this part of the brain that controls your fight or flight. Okay, so when you're feeling danger, that gets activated. Okay, well, it turns out that is kind of the center. The amygdala is the center of the negative emotions or emotional pain. So things like fear, anger, guilt, shame. Okay, all live in that section. And when we put people in an MRI machine and look at what areas of the brain light up when they're experiencing those emotions, that's what's active. That's the part of the brain that's active. Well, guess which part of the brain is active when you're experiencing physical pain? Exact same place. Okay, they are, in terms of brain function, exactly the same. Okay, they act in the same way, and the only difference is how we interpret them. Okay, and we use all sorts of things to interpret these things. And so that when we talk about that fight or flight response, when we were, early days of human beings, say hunter-gatherers or living in small villages, we didn't have to activate the fight or flight response very often. Okay, we would, if you saw like a lion chasing you, yeah, sure, you might have a fight or flight, right? But most of the time, you're doing your farming, you're doing your whatever, okay? Now, with our constant, say, Facebook feed and desire for likes, or our fear of social judgment, and all of the various things, are financial stresses, things with houses, and our increased connectivity. There's so many more people that we interact with on a daily basis than human beings maybe even 100 years ago. That there's a lot more opportunities for that stress and that fight or flight response to become activated. Okay, and so we live, a lot of us, in a more or less constant state of fight or flight. Okay, and it's being activated all day long. Okay, and if you're always telling your muscles, well, increase that tension, okay, stay tense, okay, put the blood flow to certain areas, okay, well, you're going to end up with a lot of like physical symptoms. One of the things that we know about emotion and pain is that a lot of it is related to adverse childhood events, okay, particularly trauma in childhood, which we all have to one degree or another, but when we look at people who have chronic pain, they tend to have had more traumatic childhood, whether it's neglect or abuse. And the reason for that is that the brain is formed 90% by age 5, right? Okay? And so what happens is those emotional memories imprint. They make a stamp on those emotional memory centers of the brain, right? And so in that amygdala, there's that emotional memory stamp, okay? And there's a pathway. There's this nerve pathway that's been formed before the age of 5 to send right up to your brain, right up to the higher levels of your brain. So every time you get that fight or flight, you get that danger signal, ding, boom, pain, okay? And it's that emotional activation. Okay, it's very, very, very common. So, how much time do I have? 5 minutes. Are we serious? That's it? Okay, right. What? Yeah, right. All right. So, well. So let's just briefly go through an example, and then we'll talk about some of the ways. I'm not going to be able to get into a lot of how we treat this or what we can do, but let's just get some understanding. So you wake up in the morning, you roll out of bed, and, oh, my back. Tweak my back, okay? And you say to yourself, oh, man, my back hurts, right? So you walk around, you're like, okay, I can do this. You get up, you do your day. Next day, it's a little bit worse. Okay, so you go see your doctor. The doctor examines you, hopefully, okay, in back pain, it's about 95% of back pain has no structural injury or nothing that we can structurally identify. Hopefully your doctor examines you, checks your neurologic reflexes and stuff, and says you don't have any signs of neurologic injury. You can watch this. Stay active, all right? Don't stop what you're doing. Get out and exercise. Maybe do a little yoga, okay? Take some ibuprofen if you need it. That's it, right? Hopefully your doctor doesn't say, well, we should probably get an MRI, okay? But say they do, okay? Or say the pain continues going on. You're 6 weeks later, you're still having pain. You go to your doctor, you get an MRI, and you find out you have a herniated disc, say, or you've got degenerative disc disease or bulging disc. Okay, you say, oh man, that sounds terrible, right? Well, what percentage of people have those findings on MRI? Okay, yeah, well, it depends on your age. Okay, at 30 years of age, totally healthy people with no back pain, about 30 to 50% have those findings on MRI. Okay, so it turns out is they're really normal findings. Okay, by the time you're 60, it's like 90% of people have degenerative changes on their MRI. Okay, so if you've ever had an MRI, you probably have. And what it turns out is that there's actually not any association between pain and those changes on the MRI. Okay, so there's not any more likely to have those changes. If you take people with pain, it's about the same percentage that have those findings. Okay, but what happens is you go into your doctor, come out, you got a bulging disc. He says, well, we're going to send you to a neurosurgeon, right? You go to a neurosurgeon says, we can fix that, right? So they go in, they do a surgery, they do a fusion, lumbar fusion, right? You come out, guess what? Still got pain because you didn't fix the problem, right? Or maybe it works. Okay, there's a lot of possibilities here. Okay, because back surgery is an incredibly effective placebo. It works very well. Okay, but it's kind of a dangerous placebo too. Okay, so what they do, there's been several randomized controlled blinded studies where they take people to the operating room and cut them open, and then in half they do a procedure and then the other half they don't. And what they find out is that pretty significant percentage of people where they actually do the procedure get better, 60, 70%. But the people who got the placebo, they just cut them open and then sewed them back up. They get better at about the same rates. So it's about 60, so it's a very powerful placebo. So anyway, so that's kind of an example. But this pain just kind of persists, right? It doesn't go away because it's not really because of the structural damage. And say you got it fixed, it might come back in 10 years. It might come back in 1 year because it didn't really address the problem. Okay? So how do you address the problem? In 2 minutes. All right, I'm just going to kind of give the brief overview. There's basically kind of 3 steps. Okay? The first is go to a doctor you trust and say, do I really have something wrong with me? Okay, because doctors know. If you ask them to be honest, they know if there's something that's structurally wrong with you. Okay, and if a doctor says, I really don't think that there's this structural damage in your back or your stomach or wherever that's causing this pain, choose to believe them. Okay, that's step 1. Okay, and because if you can accept that, that story, if you will, then you can begin the healing process. And then the second part is you can practice telling the pain to go away. Okay, and so making declarative statements really helps make pain go away. Okay, so you say, I have a headache. You say, go away, headache, and you take a position of power. Okay, you stand and you say, go away. And it works. It works. Right, Ron? Yeah. Okay. And then the third part is you really have to get into the emotional work in terms of going through what, childhood trauma and all sorts of other things. And there's a lot of books I can refer you to if you'd like to start going through that. If you want to talk about it, we can start looking at that kind of stuff, but I don't think we have enough time to do it today. So that's it.
We have about 2 or 3 minutes for questions.
Okay.
I think people are going to want to ask you questions.
What about the red light, green light, certain frequency bulbs at night?
What?
You haven't heard this?
No.
No, really? There's this certain frequency, I think red light. You can turn it on when you're sleeping, and it'll reduce your chronic pain.
Yeah.
Never heard that.
It'd probably work.
All right.
If you believe it'll work, it'll work. I guarantee. And actually, that kind of stuff there's all sorts of stuff out there. And there's lots of evidence that even in people with chronic, inflammatory conditions where we know there's chronic ongoing pain, rheumatoid arthritis, asthma, that you can actually, even though there is this structural issue, you can actually decrease the amount of pain, and you can actually turn off that danger signal if you believe it. And, that sounds like kind of a kooky one. I probably wouldn't go out and spend your money, but, doing some of the other stuff.
Okay, so you said it's a bad idea to have a journal and focus on, hey, does my back feel bad today? But if you reverse that and we're like, oh, what feels great today? Would that work?
Maybe. Yeah, sure. I don't know is the short answer. Yeah.
I was curious about the idea of, listening to your body or body awareness versus focusing on pain. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
What would you suggest not thinking about your body? And
No, I would not suggest not thinking about your body. So in general, being aware of what's going on in your body is a good idea. Okay, and doing like mindfulness type meditation is great. When we're talking about chronic pain, though, it's probably not the most helpful thing to like be like, oh I've got this chronic pain in my ankle. I'm gonna like drill into that with like mindfulness type stuff, because it really all it does is it brings your brain just into that spot, and it just widens that highway. Repaves it, makes it nice and smooth, and that pain can just.
So, David, does this work with other subjective type experiences as well, like vertigo, disorientation, and those kind of things?
Yeah. It works great for chronic fatigue and headaches, vertigo, palpitations. There are a ton of chronic symptoms out there that, if you've been to your doctor and they've said, I don't know what's going on, I can't find anything wrong, you should think about this, and you should look into, like, there's a couple of good books that, yeah.
All right, one last
Well, so the best
question.
place to start while he's walking over is Unlearn Your Pain, which is a great book. But there's anything by Dr. John Sarno. There's like healing back pain, but it kind of works for a lot of different things. They Can't Find Anything Wrong is actually a book that's really good to kind of start working through this stuff. But Unlearn Your Pain is probably the best place to start thinking through this stuff.
I think that the emotional part is getting missed a little bit. Will you give like one brief example of like how you can use like my calf or anything briefly on like what happens, like the negative like response in your head, how it like directly impacts the pain that you've may or may have recently opened? Just listening to the questions, I think that there's like, can you give like one example of like, yeah, you
Talk
can,
about
you can-
your
my
leg
calf.
pain?
Yeah.
Okay. Or
Ron's head or
yeah,
like,
or Eric's reflux or something.
but typically,
Well, I don't really, man, you're putting me on this. I don't know. I mean, I'm a little bit confused exactly what you're asking. So let's talk about Adrian was having some calf pain. Okay. Correct me if I say anything wrong. So it started in like the beginning of October, right? And she was running and she was training for a marathon and trying to set, personal record. And one day she started to have this calf pain. And she came to me and said, well, I'm having this calf pain. And, I think what happened was she probably pulled a muscle in her calf, okay? And there was some, little tenderness, maybe a little swelling. But what happened is there's a lot of fear about, in Adrian, is this what you want me to talk about? Yeah, so there's a lot of fear that it's not going to get better, right? That it's going to be this chronic, she said to me, I'm scared I'm never going to be able to run again. Okay, and what happened? Well, the pain got worse. Okay, I'm scared I'm never going to get better. I'm scared I have a stress fracture. And every time she said, I'm scared X, pain got worse. And it got deeper and it hurt more to the point where she had to stop running. Okay, and then every time she started running, she'd be like, I'm going to run tomorrow. I'm worried my leg's going to hurt. Well, what happened when she started running? leg started hurting, right? And she went out and we're talking like 2-3 months, long after, there's broken bones heal in like 6 weeks. Your femur breaks. The biggest bone in your body breaks. It heals in 6 weeks. Okay? Like there's no musculoskeletal injury in your body that's not healed at 6 weeks. Okay? You tear your ACL. Okay? There's a long recovery period if you're a professional athlete, but in terms of the pain and the swelling and the healing and functional recovery, pretty short. Okay? There's nothing in your leg that you hurt running that's not going to be healed in 2 months. Right? So she's out there, and every time it still hurts. Right? And that's how that kind of like that fear gets in and
Or
and
if we
affects.
had a rough morning.
Yes. Right. Go
Because
ahead.
pain, so if you like if it was like super stressful trying to get out of the house, then all of a sudden I would start running and it would hurt. And so I had to choose that the pain wasn't there and that no emotional stress in my life was going to trigger it anymore.
Yeah. That's right. Well put.